This will be the first time that the Cuban flag has flown over a Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C. for more than half a century, just to remind our viewers. There we go, the Cuban flag carefully folded up. The soldiers now carefully unfolding it. They will, of course, raise it onto that flagpole. Philip, while they do so, just remind us why this is such a highly symbolic moment.
Well, because this flag was gone for such a long time. It's not the exact same flag that was flying here in 1961. That is when the original Cuban flag disappeared. It, by the way, is inside of this Cuban embassy. It hangs on the inside of one of the windows. This is a brand new one. This is, of course, so symbolic because there simply hasn't been a Cuban embassy for so long, 5 decades altogether. This building that you're seeing right now, it was the Cuban interest section. As you're seeing the Cuban flag going up there, officially outside of what is already the Cuban embassy, what we're seeing the other side of the street right now is applause from onlookers. Again, as we said earlier, there are those who want to applaud this. There are also those who are very much against this, or at least don't see this as the final step in a renewal of the relationships between Cuba and the United States. What we're seeing is a lot of the invited guests, the dignitaries. These are ambassadors of other countries here in Washington, but also, most notably, as you said, the Cuban foreign minister will be looking on as this Cuban flag is raised outside of the embassy here in Washington. It will be flying next to other flags. To the left of this building is the Lithuanian embassy. To the right is the Polish embassy, meaning that Cuba will just have an embassy very much like all the others. It is already officially the Cuban embassy in Washington. This happened at midnight local time, and now the flag is officially there, reaching the highest point of the flagpole, and there it is. Now it has become official. The Cuban flag is now outside of the Cuban embassy, and that is the symbol that this renewal of the relationship between the United States and Cuba needed. That began, of course, with that phone call between Presidents Obama and Castro in December of last year. It's gone pretty quickly from the moment they said they wanted to renew ties to the actual Cuban flag flying again outside of the embassy here in Washington.
Philip, we can hear some applause there as that flag flies on that flagpole. Luckily for the dignitaries, there is some wind today in Washington, D.C. We also heard some people shouting. Were those the protesters, or were these people shouting celebratory statements?
No, there are those who right in front of me are just shouting Cuba, Cuba. They are those who are very happy that Cuba is showing a diplomatic presence again in Washington, D.C. There are many here celebrating this, but when you hear shouts, well, they could very, very well be shouts against this kind of a renewal of diplomatic ties, or at least those who think that this is not going far enough, because the biggest chant that you'll hear outside of this new Cuban embassy is the one against the trade embargo. That Cubans and Cuban Americans, many of them, believe is the biggest symbolic step that is still to be taken between the two countries. And that is, of course, much more difficult to do than just opening embassies. That needs congressional approval. President Obama wants this to go through, but he needs Republicans on his side to actually lift the embargo. That might not happen during the Obama presidency. There's still a long, long way to go. Hence, a lot of protesters here saying that, well, this is simply not good enough. The United States has to get rid of this embargo once and for all.
Indeed. Okay, thanks very much for now, Philip Crowther. We'll just keep those pictures a couple of moments longer. You can hear some of the shouts of Viva Cuba and other statements from people there at the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C., now officially reinstated. As of midnight last night, local time, in fact, the flag just raised there once again. A Cuban flag flying in Washington, D.C. for the first time in more than 50 years.